Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual marketing training. Today, we're talking about repurposing content. So really, this is about how to take one larger piece of content, we're calling it an anchor piece, and taking it and kind of getting the most out of it, maximizing it and turning it into smaller pieces of content, and getting a lot of leverage and mileage out of the things that we create. Forgive my voice today. I'm coming down, I think, with a little bit of something, but we're going to dive right in. So to start with, we will introduce ourselves, share your name, your program, your role, and your favorite way to share impact stories. So do you like sharing them on social media? Do you prefer using a blog or an email, something like that? And that's really what this is for. But we're going to skip the icebreaker today and keep moving on to the content. So really, the goal of today's session, like I said, is to learn how to extend the life and reach of your content across multiple platforms. Really, this is for us, right? For small nonprofit teams, we have limited time, budget, and staff. And so we really want to get the most out of the things that we do have. So today, the goal is that you'll walk away with content repurposing checklists, real life examples of how to do this, and then time-saving strategies that you can implement right away. So here are some reasons why repurposing matters, right? It saves time and effort. It helps us reach more people through using different platforms. It reinforces our message. So it takes our themes, our messages, and helps us really support it through all these different platforms and ways. So people are hearing it multiple times in different ways of hearing the same message. And that's a good thing, right? We want them to remember what we're all about. It also increases our content return on investment. So you might put a lot of time into getting that one big piece of anchor content. But then instead of doing that same amount of lift every single time you want to share something, you could do that lift once and then get a lot of mileage out of it and then do it again later, right? Instead of having this constant demand on these like really time intensive content gathering. So it increases our return on investment. Okay, so now we're going to dive in and talk about how to begin when it comes to repurposing. Okay, so you want to start with that strong anchor content piece. And this is what I mentioned earlier. So that anchor content piece is going to be that bigger, usually it's a bigger thing. So it could be a blog post, an email newsletter, maybe a recorded event or webinar where you have someone speaking, or a compelling volunteer story. Maybe you did a volunteer interview, right? Which last month when we talked about blogging and authentic storytelling, we talked about how to start, how to get those volunteer stories and good strategies for that. So hopefully you all have done one of those by now, if not already had done them. And so you have a good volunteer story that we can, or a blog post that we can start with today and use as your anchor piece that we're going to be working from. So you want to choose something that already performs well, right? So you can, if you don't have anything new, you can actually look back at your previous posts, your previous newsletters, things like that. Look for something you've already done, right? A volunteer story, anything like that. That is out there that aligns with your goals, your mission, who you're targeting, all of those things that we've been talking about, and pull that, right? So it doesn't have to be anything new. You can actually go back in the archives. So the next thing you want to do, and here's just some quick ideas of ways you could, easy things you can do with that piece of content, right? So you could just pull one quote out of there that's a really great quote and use that for like a graphic post on Instagram. And you'll know how I feel about graphics. So you could also put it in the caption and have a picture of your volunteer. You could summarize it as a LinkedIn article. As y'all know, I love LinkedIn. I talk about LinkedIn all the time. And so anytime you can use content you have on a LinkedIn article, those often get a lot of good traction and are reaching a working demographic that are passionate about being involved in their community and passionate about leveling up personally, right? So you could take an interview, for example, with a volunteer, and I think I did this a little bit last week or last month, where we talked about how can you convert this into bullet points, and maybe it's 5 lessons I learned from being a CASA volunteer, right? So that's a really great format for something like a LinkedIn article. You could pull, instead of doing the entire long interview and posting that, you could pull just a few short little moments of something really interesting that they said and make it into a reel or a short form video and use that on your platforms. You could also use key facts in a fundraising email, right? So if you are doing a end of year campaign or a spring giving campaign, you could take the story that was shared and pull parts of that and key moments from that in your fundraising outreach. Carousel slides are usually on social media when you have a post that's multiple photos, especially on Instagram. Those are called carousels. So you could, again, kind of pulling that four things I learned as a CASA volunteer, you could do that, right? You could make that a carousel and have each picture be a different lesson that they learned from being a CASA volunteer. And then, of course, you could always share little pieces of that on your stories as a behind the scenes or an impact snapshot. Okay, so I know this is a lot of information, right? To say like, here's all these different things you can do, and it's easy to just list them off, but that doesn't always translate mentally when we're imagining, we're looking at a piece, we're like, okay, how do I do this again? So I'm gonna walk through and show you a piece of content that I have and the different ways that I have repurposed it. And some of them you'll recognize immediately and say, oh yeah, I can tell these are the same piece of content. And some might look a little different, right? And so they vary in like how close they might seem to the original piece of content. So we're gonna start. The very first thing I'm gonna pull from my anchor piece of content is the conference keynote address, right? So this was a video that we have a Zoom from Ali shared on Zoom or captured on Zoom and recorded, and it's Shemaine Holly's keynote address. So you can see here she starts speaking at around 14 minutes, and she goes all the way till the end of this video, right? So that's close to a 40-minute video here. That's really long, and that's not something that a lot of people are going to watch, right? Like the full thing. And this isn't, I don't think we've shared this full thing publicly anyhow, but this is something that we have and that I have access to. So the first thing I do from that is I actually made a short form video with her. And so this was that, and it's on our social media. And it was just her talking to the camera, and it's a lot shorter. I think it's like maybe 60 seconds. And you can see here the transcript of what she said on the screen. So she's talking about her volunteers and how they are the bomb diggity, as she said, and that she wants every person in care to have a CASA volunteer. And then she also thanks the CASA volunteers in Georgia for doing what we do, right? Um, so that was the first way I repurposed working with her. And I could have taken a piece of this out and just pulled the audio. I probably wouldn't have used the visual because it's a little grainy, but I could have put it with a picture of her, or I could have put words on the screen and had the audio playing from her speech. So that's one thing. The next thing I did was on Jen's monthly email. I mean, this is what I mean, where it may not always look so obvious or look so similar. But she talked about just all the preparation that goes into the conference and kind of reflecting on the conference. And in that, she mentions Shemaine and then pulls a quote from her talk and includes it here in the letter. This is another way we've repurposed this interview. And then at the bottom, I included a photo there of her and Shemaine from the conference. Um, and so that's another, I think this is a really great example, right? Because it's not always the obvious thing, or like just taking that same piece and showing it, but using it and incorporating small bits of it in different ways. And so here we have a few different quotes from Shemaine's speech in this email here. So the next thing I did was I also did a LinkedIn post, right? So I linked the full letter from Jen, but I also reshared this beautiful photo of them and mentioned that Shemaine shared her story at the Georgia CASA conference, and you can read the full letter here, right? So that's another way I reshared that. Okay, and then we also did for CASA Day at the Capitol this year. We didn't have a full day, but we did instead. I made booklets for every new legislator that joined in Georgia, and so in that booklet, so it's like an informational booklet about us and what we do. I included here a page about sort of the impact, and I used a quote from Shemaine's talk. I used her photo and then mentioned that she experienced 13 foster care placements in Georgia, and that she shared her story and her journey at the CASA conference. And then I also shared this today. So I took a quote from her, and I put it here on her photo, and I shared just that when she first had her volunteer, she wasn't interested, but over time, their consistency and care won her over. And today she considers them a foundational part of her life. She shared her story at last year's Georgia CASA conference and how we don't always get to hear about the long-term impact in such a personal way, but it's moments like this that remind us to keep showing up and showing care and that we're proud of her. And I mean, I just shared that. I think this might even be a little bit higher. I'm going to refresh that. I just shared this a few hours ago. Yep, and already it's gotten a lot of comments, 13 shares, you see there, 24 likes. And I also shared it on Instagram and LinkedIn. So this one image here is getting a lot of traction. And this is from an interview or a speech that she gave back in August, right? So we've had a lot of mileage out of this one piece of content. So a few more things that I could do. So the photo post is the one I just shared, but I could do a blog, right? I could take her talk and convert it into a blog. And that's something I have yet to do, right? That's in the future. But so all from this one video and the mileage starting going from August all the way to now, I've continued to be able to pull from this one bigger, higher quality anchor piece, right? So that's just an example of showing you how to do something and not just a list, right? Okay. So just a few quick do's and don'ts. So do tailor your message for each platform, right? So I know that the video does best on Instagram. As much as like we want to share all of our videos in all of our places, we know that that doesn't always translate well to other platforms. So knowing that the short video is best for that platform and keeping it under 90 seconds. But then like the longer form in Jen's email letter, that fits better there, right? And like putting it in that personalized context in Jen's voice, sharing her reaction to hearing Shemaine speaking, incorporating some of those quotes, but then also contextualizing it with her perspective as the executive director of Georgia CASA and how hearing her words, what that meant to her, right? So that was appropriate for those email messages. So thinking about this one piece and saying, and not just using it in the same way, but really being thoughtful about how you interpret it on the different platforms. So don't just copy and paste the same content everywhere, right? You saw how different each of those things was, and that's really important that you take into consideration what works best in those places. Do give your audience multiple ways to engage with the same message, right? So by putting it in these different platforms, email versus a video versus a blog versus in the booklet, right? Those are all different audiences. They all have different purposes and different ways that the people receiving it can engage with the message. And then don't let great content get posted once and be forgotten. So this goes back to what I said earlier. Go back through your archives, look through your old newsletters, look at your old blogs, your old volunteer interviews, and find something that really clicked and resonated with people, what performed really well, and say, okay, how else can I use this? So do reuse content that is still relevant or high performing. So like I said, you can go on your meta dashboard and see what posts have performed the best performing content in the last, you could do quarter, you could even do year, or you can do even longer than that, right? And see what those top things are and think about how to repurpose those. Okay, so for the activity for today, your homework for today is to choose one piece of content your organization has recently shared, or it doesn't have to be that recent if you want to pull back deeper and find one that just has been really high performing. Think about what type of content was it? Was it a post? Was it a blog? Was it an email? Was it a video, right? And then think about how you can break it into smaller parts or you can reformat it for a different platform. And then think about what platforms would be a good fit to repurpose this. So that is your homework for today's session. Okay, well, that is it.